Okay, this is a second video in our look at Android architectures, and we're going to look at our basic architecture without, or setup without really any good architecture that we did in our in the assignment last week. So that was this tip calculator, where we created a tip calculator here that we used. So the tip calculator, we could enter an amount and number of parties. I actually added this seek bar where I could select and it would change the number of parties here. And then we could select, say if we had outstanding service or not, and then it would calculate the tip amounts for this. So you did this as an assignment. This is probably what you created. So you have one layout. This is your XML file that's part of the user interface. But then you have to also have the main activity, and this is generally considered part of the user interface also for this. So inside of the main activity, you have an onCreate method, and we set up ties to the XML stuff. And then we handle our on-click button. And here's where we're calculating the tip. And this is the actual kind of business logic. What we might think of is the tip and that sort of stuff as being the model, the data model here. And we'll look at more complicated things in the future, things like we'll look at pizza orders and keeping track of a whole list of pizzas or an order or information, that sort of stuff. Here again, our kind of business logic is a tip. And again, this isn't very long. There's just a couple lines here of stuff, and you might say, why is that even important? Well, this is just a kind of a trivial project, but more complicated projects, this, of course, will get more complicated. For example, we just did a currency converter in class, and you could see that getting quite complicated, where we're going to get the currency rates from from a web service, and we'll be pulling in, so there'll be more logic tied into this. What we'll look at is moving this out into a separate class. Now, while we're here, I'm going to mention just another structure here, and this is this version with fragments. So with the version with fragments, you not only have your main layout, but inside that you have another layout, and inside that you have what is called a fragment. And a lot of Android development works with fragments, although we'll use them some, but they add some complexity here, so we'll try to limit the use of them. But a fragment is just a portion of the screen. It can be a whole screen, and we can swap screens in and out depending on how the user interface is set up, or it can be just a portion of your screen for this. Stuff. It's really helpful when you're switching layouts or switching sides of tablets. You can have display one fragment or multiple fragments depending on how big your screen is. Similarly, in your code, you'll have a main activity object, but Java class, but that will delegate most of the responsibility to a fragment class. And this is where much of your code will be. And there's a little bit, let's just look at a simple example here. So again, this is the currency converter as fragments. So again, we have this main activity screen, and it looks like it has the currency, all the information here, but this is actually a fragment within this. If I look at the code here, there's none of the normal things. There's just an including of the context. So it includes this context object. So where the context object may not have the menu around it, it still seems like it has a lot of stuff in there, but it actually is a fragment, and it is hosting another fragment, or it's actually a container that's hosting a fragment. So the fragment is actually where we'd change the code. So let's just look at that again. Inside our class, we have this main activity class, and we have onCreate. It handles some code here, but most of it is delegated to a fragment class. So it will have, again, often multiple fragments, but here's one of the fragment classes here. And so rather than having onCreate, it has an onCreate view, which is similar to that. But again, similar logic here where we put in our button listener and we tie into our objects and stuff like that, but we're doing in a fragment class. So I just want to point that out, that sometimes you'll see this structure with fragments. Okay, so that's the basic structure. But again, we want to pull this out. We're going to take this and add a tip class in here to make this a little more complicated, and that'll be this next view.